And a big welcome to our live audience for Digital Health Investor Talk. I'm your host, Stephen Wardell. I'm the managing partner of Wardell Advisors, a digital health advisory firm, and the author of The Future of Digital Health. Wardell Advisors is helping digital health companies address issues around growth, fundraising, trade sales, and strategic alternatives, giving you more options in today's challenging environment. You can follow me at x.com/Stephen Wardell. Our show today is on the topic of a tech framework for aging in place, and our guest is Neal Shah. Neal is the CEO of CareYaya and America's Chief Elder Officer, and you can follow him on at /Neal K. Shah. This show is being recorded and will be included in my podcast series called The Digital Health Investor Talk Show. You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple and Spotify and leave us a review. We always love getting 5-star reviews. If you have a new podcast, we have new podcast links for the show. So make sure you see recent episodes when you subscribe, or you could be on the old show pages. This is not investment advice, and we are not investment advisors. Here's the format of today's show. It's 90 minutes long, and Neal and I will spend the first part discussing the news and the macro picture and other topics like that. And then we'll focus on our special topic of the day. And throughout the show, you can ask your questions in the LinkedIn chat, and we'll take those questions. And so I'll just make a note here. And so William from the audience says, "Hi, Neal, great to see you."
Hey, William, and hey, everyone.
And so we'll start off by just, Neal, can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And hey, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to hear what we have to say. I'm Neal Shah. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CareYaya Health Technologies. We are one of the fastest growing health tech startups in America, recently voted by LinkedIn as one of the top 50 startups in America. It was really awesome to be on that list with big companies like Perplexity and other. We're a very mission-driven organization looking to improve access to and improve quality of home-based care. Specifically focusing on the aging population. I have a non-traditional background from healthcare innovation. I actually, prior to this, was a hedge fund manager in New York. I ran a $250 million hedge fund. And at the peak of my career in my mid-30s, I suddenly found myself becoming a caregiver. So the mission is very deeply personal to me. I thought there was a huge opportunity and unmet need for social impact and bringing technology and innovation into improving care delivery in our country. So yeah, I'm excited to discuss more.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move on to macro news. So this is about stock market indices, inflation, interest rates, job levels. For our audience, feel free to ask your own questions or point to your own stories in the chat. So I guess I'd call attention when talking about macro news that stocks are at record highs and the NASDAQ is at 20,000. And if you want to be humble, just think that if all you'd done 2 years ago was put your money in the NASDAQ, then it would have doubled by now. I would say that there's also a fear, a concern that valuation levels may be a little high. And it's a generalized concern that valuation is high and that NASDAQ is, represents growth stocks and tech stocks. And then it's a more specific concern because of two things. One is what I'll call the B2B productivity stack. And this is companies like Microsoft, Oracle, and others. And there's concern that those B2B companies are going to take a hit on earnings in the future because of competition, and that could bring the indices down. And the second is that other things driving the NASDAQ high is the FANG, or the Magnificent, I forget what they're called, the Magnificent Nine, which are often lifted by AI stories. And AI is a promise that has not delivered yet. It's a promise a lot of people feel pretty good about, but it has not delivered yet in terms of, say, high margin, best-selling products. And so there's concern, but in general, NASDAQ at 20,000 is good for the innovation community. It's good for digital health. We want to see high stock market indices. We'd like to see this turn into high valuations for private companies, and then exits for private companies, IPOs and acquisitions for private companies, and investors confidently investing at the early cycle because they believe they can sell at high valuations in the future. But within that NASDAQ, it's notable that digital health companies are not getting a lot of the lift. Digital health companies have not benefited over the last 2 years the way that B2B productivity stack and the way that that has benefited over the last 2 years. But nevertheless, we'll take a high NASDAQ rate. Neal, any thoughts on this? What numbers do you like to follow? Any thoughts just for our audience to sort of summarize the current state of where we are?
Yeah, sure, Steve. I mean, I think, I kind of look generally at overall index levels and valuations at a high level as like a reflection of, what's happened in the last like 6 to 12 months. So, it tends to be like very backward looking. And, I think that things have been decent from a technology perspective. I mean, I think, like you said, AI stories are everywhere. I think AI is a big productivity unlock for a lot of companies and also a great innovation opportunity. So, big picture, I don't really have, kind of a lot of specific thoughts. I know some companies have unbelievable dominant market share, like NVIDIA, are just like driving a lot of the bus. But I think kind of the second order impacts of what does that mean and what do all these developing technologies mean for innovation, I think we'll likely see over the next few years. So overall, I view it as, to your point about index and how that affects innovation and valuation. I sometimes think when valuations are too good, I observe there's a lot of frivolous innovation going on because everybody kind of just jumps into the party, trying to build stuff for exit. When valuations are tough, like kind of like this down cycle in digital health funding that we've come out of over the last 3 years, then I feel like you have like real impact innovators that are like saying, I'm just going to do this for the long term, regardless of what the market environment is. So of course, I operate more like the latter, where like, I'm going to do this no matter what. So the external valuation environment doesn't really matter to me. And in fact, I would almost say sometimes I prefer there to be a more muted valuation environment because it keeps out the tourists. But so it'll be interesting to see. I think if it stays at this level for the next 6 months or 12 months, I think there will be a rush of funding into the sector and probably then a rush of entrepreneurial activity. So it'll be interesting to watch.
That's great. And I thank you. And I just came back from JP Morgan. And did you happen to go this year?
No, I didn't go this year, but I am curious what your takeaways were.
So what I'll do is for you and for our audience, I'll sort of give you some takeaways from there and would love to get your reaction. And for our audience, feel free to ask any questions. So the JP Morgan Healthcare Investor Conference, it's a very unusual conference, but a lot of people use it for fundraising and they take their findings from it as setting the tone for the next 6 months or even the next year. And the company JP Morgan has taken the conference in the direction of large public biotech, but the innovation community around digital health has chosen to meet there as well. Many of the VCs, many of the CEOs go there to go and do meetings all day long, 9 meetings a day. And so the first is that there's great hope on the part of CEOs in digital health that the venture fundraising market is improving. And there's reason to think it should improve. It should improve because interest rates have come down and NASDAQ levels have gone up, and funds raised money 3 years ago and that have not been putting it to work rapidly. And so that means if they're going to put it all to work in 7 years or 9 years, that they need to start putting it to work at a faster rate than before. So that all makes sense. But the concerning news out of JP Morgan was no one is seeing that lift right now. It would be a lift in terms of number of venture deals, ease of venture deals at the seed A and B stage, the standards not being so high and focused on de-risking, et cetera. That's what we're looking for. So we have not seen that. People don't see it, and they don't necessarily see it happening in the next few months either. So that was a disappointment. And one CEO described it to me. His view to me was continuing disappointed because they thought it could have improved third quarter of last year, fourth quarter of last year. Now we're early first quarter of this year and not seeing that improvement. It's a bit of a mystery because the funds have to put the money to work and have been only putting it to work slowly. So where's it going to go? And so the next is that there was a lot of interest in the idea of employer health tech consolidating. And so this was kicked off. This sector is ripe for consolidation. Consolidation in the sector is going to be driven by the buyers, the benefit leader at the progressive large employer wanting to buy platforms and suites and complete solutions and not wanting point solutions as much. And so that means that the larger vendors are going to fill in the holes in their suites by buying the smaller vendors. That's what's going on in employer health. And in the lead up to this conference, suddenly Glenn Tolman's Transcarent announced that it was acquiring Accolade. And so that was a very important deal going into this. And people are saying that this is sort of the starting gun that is kicking off a consolidation of the employer health tech sector. There's other sectors in this, and there are not signs of consolidation in other sectors as much, but they seem to be happening here. And it was significant that Accolade is a public company because public company is always valued and always for sale. And you can't argue with the public valuation. You can't say that it was valued privately 3 years ago much higher. It doesn't matter. And so Accolade can just be bought. And what we're hearing is that a big impediment to more of these deals happening is that private companies are saying, hey, we were valued at $800 million 3 years ago. We don't want to accept a $200 million valuation today. I heard stories of mid-sized consolidators making offers to buy small point solutions, and the point solution can't agree on being acquired for a lower valuation, and they're low on cash and their earnings negative, and they run out of money, and then their assets are bought later for much lower than they would have been bought as a whole company. So the whole digital health sector has had under shakeout since 2009 for 16 years and under consolidation for 16 years because of the Fed's ZIRP policy. And everyone expects there to be a shakeout and consolidation. And the question is when and why is it so delayed? And now we don't have ZIRP anymore, and we have higher interest rates, 4% risk-free and significantly higher than that corporate rate. And so people are expecting this consolidation to happen, starting with employer health tax. So the next was the hot sectors at JP Morgan. It was a subdued, weak funding environment. Nevertheless, inside of that, there were hot sectors. And the hot sectors were any company with a Gen AI product and any company with software around GLP-1s. GLP-1s are hot as a drug, and they're hot as a software program around a drug as well. And a lot of the diabetes and weight loss and metabolic program companies have had to reinvent themselves around GLP-1s over the last 2 years. So those were the favored themes of the conference. The disfavored themes of the conference were medtech and prescription digital therapeutics. So prescription digital therapeutics have had a number of problems. There's never been a hit product among prescription digital therapeutics, and Care, which was the champion, went wound down. And there have been other issues. Achilles, I believe, which I thought highly of Achilles' product, they chose to go the consumer pay route rather than the prescription route for the company. And then medtech. So I've heard from medtech players that these days it costs too much, takes too long to build medtech products, and then there's not great exit opportunities. And as an investor, you're not going to get into an opportunity. There's not a great exit for the opportunity. And this is different from 20 years ago when it seemed like medtech, you could, if you had a great innovation, it didn't take that long, didn't cost that much, and you had great exit opportunities. So that's why medtech seems to be out of favor. So then there's also, I've heard what I'll call the doom thesis expressed. This is a very concerning thing. And the doom thesis is that starting in 2009, there were two factors that were the starting gun for the modern digital health sector. The first was that the government had the meaningful use subsidy and dropped $40 billion on the heads of hospitals to buy EMRs. The second was that the global financial crisis came to an end, and the Fed began a zero interest rate policy. And all over the world, all large investors wanted to increase their allocation to growth, especially growth in the U.S. And in the U.S., growth means tech or healthcare. And at the intersection of tech and healthcare is digital health. So we had massive entry into digital health. We had entry of LPs. We had entry of venture funds. We had entry of venture partners. We had entry of entrepreneurs, of new company formation, of new software products, of talent. We had entry of everything into digital health. We had thousands of digital health companies started and successfully raised money. And this went on for years and years. And I was an analyst on Wall Street during this time, and I was making predictions that we would have a shakeout and consolidation in 2006, 2019. And we didn't have one. And it wasn't clear why at the time, but in retrospect, it was definitely because it was so easy to go out and raise money on good terms that a weak company wouldn't be shaken out. And a strong company didn't have to sell to a consolidator. It could go and raise an even bigger round at a higher valuation and become the consolidator itself. So that was the world we lived in until 3 years ago. The doom scenario is, so I think I've seen a prominent digital health executive. I reached out to him for comment, and I didn't hear back, so I won't say his name, but there's a prominent digital health executive who said that 50% to 75% of digital health companies that raised money within the last 5 years won't be here anymore in a couple of years. So that's part of the doom scenario. And I presume that means that they wind down or are consolidated, and it tends to be today a buyer's market. So to be consolidated means selling and not getting a great multiple when you sell. So, and then Matthew Holt, who's a commentator, has also talked a lot about the doom scenario. But part of the doom thesis is that we're also seeing new, less than 2 years old, new digital health companies that are supported by Gen AI popping up. And the two characteristics of Gen AI companies is, number one, they seem to cost less to set up and build software and take less time to complete software products than the prior generation of tech. And that's the first characteristic. The second characteristic is that they use Gen AI in their product for feature functionality, and they're bragging about certain capabilities, better automation, better success rates with Gen AI, they claim. And so the part of the doom thesis is that this whole generation of thousands of companies that are not Gen AI are about to be lapped by a new generation of Gen AI companies. And the old generation of digital health startups, they're often still earnings negative. They belt tightened, which means they took their top line growth rate from 70% down to 10%. They're not growth companies anymore. And their tech stack was not built using generative AI, and their product does not have generative AI feature and functionality. And they have trouble raising money. The characteristic of these new companies, less than 10 years old, targeted on the same products to the same customers, is they have this, and they are also of interest to investors, and they can often get sales meetings with product buyers because they can brag about bright, shiny new object with better feature and functionality than the prior generation. So what is going to happen to these thousands of digital health companies that they belt tightened 2 years ago, so they don't have a pile of cash to go and redo all their products quickly? What's going to happen to these companies? So that's the question and the doom thesis. And then another major finding at JP Morgan was people were saying that, that we need to see interest rates come down further. The Fed has said they will. They're in a cutting cycle. They will cut rates further, but the market is a little disappointed. I think I heard they might cut rates by 1 full point in 1 year. And that's slow to cut rates. And a year ago, the market wanted them to cut rates by more than that. So we'll see. There's been a lot of change recently. It's not clear what's happening with inflation in the economy. So we can expect the Fed to both be predictable, but also freshen what they're seeing and what they're saying about the future. Also, there's just a lot of concern by investors that there have not been a lot of good exits in digital health. So Teladoc is a champion in digital health. They have not, their stock price is down. They have not had a good exit for investors. Many investors' money is tied up in unicorns that would like to go public, but the IPO window is closed. There have not been a lot of acquisitions. Now we may see consolidation and acquisitions, but it's a buyer's market on buyer's terms, not high multiples. So this sector is like the sector's in detention at high school, and investors want to see high quality exits that make returns for investors. So we need that. Part of that is we need the IPO window to open, and we need interest rates to fall. And young companies need to accept lower valuations to make their next fundraise or to sell their company in a trade sale. So that was the takings on JP Morgan findings, not bubbly, not frothy at JP Morgan this year. And so for Neal, you have any reactions to that or your own thoughts? And for our audience, feel free to type any questions in the chat.
Yeah, sure. Steve, fascinating insights. Thanks for sharing. I think a few different observations, because I'm kind of like an outsider, like that's relatively new to the ecosystem. I think the brutal logic of the market is probably anyone who funded Series B, C, D into digital health companies pre-Gen AI might as well just write off their investment, because I think the logic is very sound. There's companies with massive amounts of infrastructure that if they haven't figured out how to survive and be profitable, there's two guys in a garage somewhere building the same thing with Gen AI, and then now with like Gen AI agents that are probably going to be able to deliver a similar type service quite a bit cheaper. So I think that is probably partly responsible for, kind of like maybe a sourness in the investor side of like, what should I fund? I think the other thing I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few years is what is the need for the venture capital ecosystem the way it's developed? This idea of seed round, Series A round. If you think about what was Airbnb's seed round, I don't even know how you categorize that, but 150,000 was their Series A round. What was defined in 2008, 2009 as modest amounts of capital to really aggressively build something, bring it to market and prove it out, and then ensure a pathway to sustainability has somehow morphed into, over a 15-year zero interest rate cycle, into this like series of round after round with like no sustainability, and just kind of like almost the capital raising itself is the brag. So yeah, I think one, that might go away. And then two, I think the logic of, do you need an ecosystem like that to fund innovation? If fewer people using tech can do interesting things that bring service to a large number of people, I don't see, what is the need of the structure of Series A, then go out and hire 20 people, then Series B and make that 20 into 200 people, then Series C and so on, right? Like, what if huge companies can be built with a handful of people, with 10 people, 15 people at max? Then the entire funding model of innovation might change, and the reason for existence of some firms, to be of certain size that they have to deploy 100 million checks and 50 million checks just might not be necessary. So I think it's something interesting to think about. I'm not sure what the conclusion on that is, but I do think a lot of things are changing. Now, for the enterprising investor and the enterprising entrepreneur, that is a huge opportunity, because that means stuff can be built cheap, stuff can be scaled fast. Other companies are stuck. Like, whenever I hear these things, there's a company directly in my sector that's Series D, has raised way more funding than we have, and it's kind of stuck. I won't name names, but you can just tell they're stuck with a workforce. They're stuck digging themselves out of a hole. And we, with like a fraction of the staff, can move faster and achieve a similar amount of output without that burden. So yeah, I think in a lot of these sectors, like, this should be viewed as a positive thing for a new entrepreneur kind of getting into the game. Frankly, it should be viewed as a positive thing for a investor who's just thinking, how can I make very high returns, finding really capital efficient things without worrying about like what their prior mandate was. Like, I have to deploy this much capital into following this rules. So yeah, I think that there is disruption in both the, kind of innovation in health tech, but also disruption in the funding model. And I think that's like very exciting.
Great, thanks. And by the way, you're one of the very few people I brought up the doom thesis with about how new Gen AI companies that use Gen AI for coding can build the same product faster on a lower capital base. Who has drawn that very stark conclusion? That's very interesting. That we could see fast startups rapidly build products that copy a lot of what's currently in the market at larger companies that have spent much more capital to get there.
I mean, I think it's like, if I wasn't doing this, it seems like a playbook. It just seems like straight up playbook for amazing innovation, because the people who have played the prior game are not able to adjust, for a variety of reasons. So yeah, I think it's a huge opportunity.
And also, I'd say with employer health tech and with provider tech and with payer tech and to a lesser extent pharma tech, the different parts of digital health, these were immature markets back in 2009. And massive amounts of money were spent building software, trying to find out, would this product be a hit? Would that product be a hit? Today, they're much more mature. Buyers know what they want. And so all that experimentation, that was a different generation and a different generation of capital that figured that out. And so now it's much more defined. And so an entrepreneur can literally say, there's defined market. I'm going to build this. Everyone's going to buy this product. I'm going to build another copy of it cheap. So
exactly. The one thing I would add, and thanks for mentioning that, I think actually the other thing I forgot to mention, where I think is another huge opportunity, is that in the last 15 years of digital health builders have really focused on the existing payer infrastructure of like, let me build things that hospitals will buy, that insurers will pay for, and I think have underinvested in pursuing the patient as consumer. And I do think that probably the absolute biggest innovation opportunity in healthcare broadly over the next 5 years plus is consumer, that consumerizing healthcare and then breaking the entire, because if you kind of think about it, healthcare in America is very broken, right? It's 20% of GDP. And I think most people would say the customer experience sucks. And optimizing ways to sell into hospitals and optimizing ways to get United Healthcare to pay, that's the old school way of doing business. There's going to be people who create a new school way of doing business that when we look back, we'll realize have fully disrupted the ecosystem. And that's going to be people who just consumerize the industry, which I think is going to improve the patient and consumer experience, but also be a different way of building. And over focusing on B2B sales cycles, multi-year, what does, this payer want, and just saying, okay, what does a person want? I think it's going to be a new approach. So I think it makes you optimistic for innovation and really innovation to solve problems, not just innovation to kind of advance existing systems. So I think the system needs to be fully disrupted.
So that's really interesting. And that there are many professional digital health venture investors, and most of them do not want to take their career into consumer healthcare. So and then consumer tech investors look askance at healthcare. Some are interested, some are not. So it's an area that not a lot of people have taken their career into, but you're pointing to it as one of the biggest opportunities.
I think so. Yeah. It hasn't happened yet, but I think it will if you kind of math it out. So, but yeah, right.
So next is the most important business and trade journal stories in healthcare and digital health in the last 2 weeks. For our audience, feel free to throw in articles you want us to comment on. I like to talk about fundraisers in this section, and I'll mention that in the last 2 weeks, there haven't been a lot of digital health funding raising announcements, and that's consistent with being at JP Morgan and seeing that the weak environment was not stepping up. Of those that exist, there's Dario Health announced, which makes diabetes and other solutions for the employer. They announced $25 million private placement, and they're using it to fund B2B growth and also their GLP-1 solution. So this clearly falls into the bucket of software companies. I think Dario doesn't have a GLP-1 drug. They're a software company. And so they're a software company that's wrapping around the GLP-1 for the employer, for other channels. And so that's consistent with that. And then Heal Health announced a $10 million fundraise for an at-home cervical cancer screening device, which is still under review by the FDA, led by Emerson Collective and Forerunner. So this is interesting. This actually is the consumer-directed health. This is at home, maybe reimbursed by payers. Sometimes these at-home tests are paid for 100% by the consumer. But this is part of the distributed health, decentralized health, at home, and consumer health trend. And then lastly, I'll bring up, this could be a healthcare story. We saw the announcement of Project Stargate, which is an AI infrastructure project led by OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank. Healthcare is the most information-centric industry. It's the industry that software and AI has penetrated least so far and has the furthest still to go. And so this is an obvious, and they spoke of, I think Larry Ellison cited as an example of what this is capable of, that they could understand individualized cancer better and then develop an individualized drug for that cancer using this kind of tech. So that was interesting to see that. Also a bit concerning for professionals like us to think that AI may be theoretically able to do the things that we do in our jobs better than we do, and leaves us wondering, what exactly we get paid the big bucks for. But for Neal, any thoughts on those and any articles of your own?
No, I mean, I think you mentioned, you covered a bunch of good ones. I also saw the Project Stargate announcement, and I was pleasantly surprised that I wasn't expecting such a heavy focus on healthcare. So it's kind of interesting of what will happen. But you're right. I think the main reason why I think a lot of the technologists are so optimistic about the healthcare industry is, of course, they've taken shots at it. But the I feel like the biggest opportunity for innovation is when there's a huge market and when people playing in that market as users hate it. And I think that is the definition of American healthcare, right? There are so many patients, everyone is going to touch the healthcare system at some point or other, right? Somehow, if you're miraculously lucky, you may not. But there's so many patients, there's so many providers, right? Physicians, physician assistants, et cetera. And it's such a large chunk of GDP, and the user experience is absolutely terrible. Patients hate it, providers hate it. So I think it's almost like the system is begging for not just incremental innovation, which I actually think, goes back to the funding point. I think a lot of the funding is incremental innovation focused, because a lot of the VC ecosystem has gotten crowded in the last, 10 years. But true disruptive innovation, I think that if there was a better or different investor ecosystem, people would be funding completely different bets, because I think it's absolutely right for just reimagining everything. And I think that's a huge opportunity because of consumer experience, or patient experience, if you want to call it. So I'm pretty excited about all this, and, see what happens.
And I'll just mention that many people have pointed out that there is no Apple of healthcare. There is no consumer company that's enormous that's in healthcare. And maybe there should be, and that could be an opportunity. So May says that legacy can be both an asset and a liability. And so, yes, I agree with that. I think some of the biggest assets of legacy is that they have the sales relationships, and they also understand the customer's journey and the customer's problems very well, usually. And a startup just doesn't have a lot of people in it, and so it can't fully staff both product engineering jobs and also marketing and customer understanding jobs or whatever. So that's a good point. Any thoughts on May's comments that legacies can be both an asset and a liability?
Yeah. I mean, actually, great comment and very powerful when analyzing this current industry. And Steve, also, you had an interesting comment on that. So I think that it's a liability in healthcare for this reason. The legacy of companies that I observe operating in healthcare, the customer is not the patient. The customer is United Healthcare. The customer is HCA, right? The customer is Mass General Hospital. That's where I think legacy, in my opinion, and I'm not trying to be, controversial. In my opinion, that is not valuable because they've thought about the wrong person as a consumer, and they have designed all the products to optimize for the health insurance company and the hospital, and not viewed that the underlying person transacting in healthcare is the patient or the patient's family. So I kind of observe that, where I think that if you think the system's going to change because it's not working for the underlying user, then the legacy knowledge of how to navigate the insurer or how to navigate the hospital is not as valuable as understanding the patient's pain point and then laser focusing and optimizing the solution on them. So I kind of view it as like we built our company with it's all outsiders, and a lot of people in the home-based care industry were telling us hey, you need to have one or two people on there. And I was like, well, if you're Amazon 1997, and I'm not saying this is an analogy, but if you're Bezos 1997 and you have a handful of people, do you need to hire somebody from Barnes & Noble or Borders to kind of tell you how to innovate in this? Or do you just say, I've never sold books online or at all, and I don't know anything about book warehousing or whatever, and I'm just going to think and figure it out because all these readers aren't able to access obscure and non-best-selling titles and want, delivery and, don't want to go browse. You kind of have to first principles. So I think, and same with Tesla, right? Does Tesla need to hire people from Exxon and GM in the early days? I don't think so. So I kind of view it as if the system's that broken, only outsiders will build something cool that insiders would never think about because it would take too much work to unlearn bad habits.
Great, thanks. And Neal, I'm going to skip some of the sections because we're running a little late. But so the next one I'll talk about this is a fun part of the show where it's what is a piece of technology that has improved your life? And so because we're talking about age tech on this show, it'll be our lives and our parents' lives as well. And so I'll throw out two here. The first is, and I mentioned this in the past, but new iPhones have an action button on it, and the action button changes it from loud ringtone mode to silent ringtone mode. But you can program it to do whatever you like. And so I think you should program it to open up before the lock screen, open up ChatGPT in voice receiving mode. And so then you're walking down the street, you press your action button on your iPhone, and you're talking to ChatGPT, and it's answering your questions verbally. So that's one for us. And then for parents, I have seen just a wonderful response from older adult parents to just simply getting them a modern new iPad. So iPads are so much more user-friendly to use than laptops. And if you have older parents, they may have a desktop, not a laptop. They may have a laptop, but an iPad it's a different animal. It's such a pleasure to use. And so it can, that they can rapidly develop favorites on it and become an important part of their day. So, Neal, any thoughts for you on reaction to that, or your own idea of a technology that improves our lives or that could improve our parents' lives?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd say on my end, probably the most helpful, ordinary use technology that has improved my life and changed a lot of my behavior is Perplexity. I've just shifted all my search. I don't use Google that much anymore because Perplexity is just better and more gets me kind of what I want. And, it's a simple thing, but I've observed that actually I'm not a paid spokesperson for Perplexity, but I'm telling everybody I know in my life, my family, my friends, try using this for a few days every time you think about Googling something, and then tell me, you're not just going to shift your whole habit. So it's the technology is awesome. And I think they've it's just the user experience and, the way they kind of display results and how, I don't know, just the quality of information is so much better because I think Google has been populated with a lot of junk. A lot of people playing SEO games, of course, a lot of sponsored ads. So you don't really get what you want. So I feel like they've made it easier. So it's a really cool, it's elegant in its simplicity. And I think it improves your life in the sense of less time wasted looking for stuff, higher trust stuff that you get, and ability to kind of look through and, kind of verify and then go down the rabbit hole. So yeah, simple and elegant technology that's like enormously adding value, in my opinion, to a lot of people that are using it.
That's great. And for our audience, I like Perplexity as well. And there's actually a way to get your browser to treat Perplexity as your default search engine instead of just visiting the Perplexity page.
Didn't know that.
You type it in, you type something in the search bar, and Perplexity is your default search engine for that. There's a line of code. If you just search this topic in, you'll find the line of code, and you can use that to create a search engine and then make it your default search engine in Google Chrome. So
thank you for the tip. I didn't know that. I'm going to do that right after we finish this. That's awesome.
And we have a remark from Jan that where we tried to sell DTC, the response in this country is that if my insurance won't pay for it, then I won't pay for it. That is a very common response, Jan. And so I think part of what's happening is there are high deductible health plans where you might have to pay $3,000 out of pocket before you get to insured payment. And then you're spending dollar for dollar out of your own pocket directly, make choices as a consumer. And it's also just consumer dissatisfaction. I think that there's this interesting phenomenon where your doctor would love to have a conversation with you about getting you tested for sexually transmitted diseases, about your erectile dysfunction, about your hair loss, about your obesity. Your doctor would love to have that conversation and then prescribe you a drug afterward for these things or a test. And instead, people don't want to have that conversation face to face. They don't want to wait. They don't want to show up at the doctor's office. They don't want to have that conversation face to face. Instead, they like going to online sites like Everlywell or Row or Hims or Hers and order it and have it delivered to their home and talk to a stranger on the internet about their sexual dysfunction or something like that. So your doctor's really missing out. But in many of those cases, those are consumer pay. So any other thoughts on the issue that consumers don't want to pay?
Sure. No, I mean, I think it's a fair comment. I think it's consumers currently don't want to pay because I think you're right. The insurance system is the middleman. I think to pull off consumer innovation, probably easier to go into markets that are lower price point and select markets where consumer is paying anyway, whether or not they want to, or whether or not that's kind of the only option due to insurance not covering. So like in home-based care right now, I'll talk about this in more detail, but like home-based care for older adults with dementia, it's like insurance doesn't pay anyway. So it's like an easier market to enter as a foothold. But I think over time, as a lot of people are having subpar experiences with insurance, people are turning to more consumer options. So, I think there's opportunity for innovation, but you have to pick your market. If somebody else is going to pay in that market, it's going to be very hard to innovate, from a consumer standpoint. So there's other markets.
Thanks. So the next section is upcoming conferences. So this is conferences either that you recommend or that our audience is likely going to go to that you have views on. So I'll mention here the Vive conference coming up February 16th to 19th in association with Chime. So this is a conference made by the same people who made the health conference in Las Vegas in October. And it's a fun conference. It's a smaller conference. Health is focused on all innovation in all of healthcare, whereas Vive is focused on the hospital and health plan budgets, which are two of the biggest budgets for innovation, for technology and innovation. And Vive is built to be a HIMSS killer. So HIMSS is a flawed conference. It's important in certain ways, but Vive is built to it's put before HIMSS. It's designed to have people spend their marketing budgets at Vive and then not go to HIMSS after that. And Vive is very strong at getting investors to come and innovation officers from incumbents to come and to get young tech companies to come. But Vive and they also have a CIO organization, Chime as well, that's bringing in buyers and hospital CIOs. But Vive is not a trade show. And so Vive doesn't have a whole lot of buyers and not a lot of software purchasing happens at Vive. And I know it's a young conference, they want to improve that, but it leads with being, I think, with being an investor conference. It's February 16th to 19th in Nashville. And so for our audience, I would say, if you're fundraising, if you sell into payers and providers and you're fundraising, absolutely go right to all the VCs that say, let's meet there. Would I exhibit there? Probably not, because it's not a trade show. And you could do the meetings without having to pay to exhibit there. I'd have maybe the CEO go only, or if you have a typical team who speaks in fundraising meetings, like the CEO and the head of sales, have both of them go. So any thoughts on Vive?
No comments. I've never been.
And then there's also the PM 360 Spark Innovation Summit coming up February 24th in New York. So this is a conference for pharma tech companies to speak and to pitch to pharma commercial executives about buying their software. So that's a lot of these buyers are based in New York. This is a conference in New York. It's a good way to reach out to pharma brand managers, product marketers in pharma if you sell into the pharma commercial budget. So then what's a good age tech conference? Do you go to age tech conferences? Is there one you recommend for our audience?
Yeah, there's a couple, I think. So I just got back from CES a couple of weeks ago where there's a emerging focus on age tech, and AARP runs a huge booth there for the age tech collaborative. So that's kind of interesting to see a lot of products, but more like a trade show. I think industry specific conference. There's a great one coming up in San Francisco called the What's Next Longevity Summit. Run by Mary Furlong and Associates and also AARP. So that's a really good one. We found that to be incredibly valuable. And then AARP themselves run one in DC. I believe that happens in like August or September, Age Tech Innovation Summit. So that's pretty good. And then there's a Washington Innovation Summit that usually happens in December. Just went to a couple months ago, also co-hosted by AARP and Mary Furlong and Associates in DC. So I'd say those have been some of the good ones.
That's really great. So last is personal notices. So this is where you and I can mention things we're doing and invite our audience to meet up, etc. So I'll mention that. So February 19th, I'm hosting a longevity leadership brunch in Costa Rica. And so if you're in Costa Rica in February, let me know. This is going to be on the West Coast. And so so longevity leadership brunch on February 19th. And then my next show is going to be in 2 weeks on the uses of AI in the healthcare delivery process with Chad Pytel. So those are my personal notices. Neal, any personal notices from you?
Yeah, personal notice is we're launching another startup out of CareYaya that we're incubating in the next couple of weeks, Counterforce Health. And the opportunity that we saw in light of kind of current events is a lot of patients and family caregivers are struggling with health insurance claim denials. The appeals process is just brutal, intimidating. A lot of people aren't aware of their rights. So we're building a lot of AI tools to help basically streamline and as close to possible one-click the process for both patients as well as physician practices, building both kind of easier ways to generate appeals letters, but also voice AI agents to deal with a lot of the interaction on your behalf. And that's kind of like the end game. So it's going to be a really cool tool that it's effectively a patient advocacy tool. But as we started speaking with a lot of small independent physician practices, we realized that a disproportionate amount of their time is going into this process as well. And it's not just a time issue, it's also just kind of a payments and revenue cycle issue. So huge opportunity, but again, kind of like very consumer focused innovation. Like we're not interested in building this and going to big hospitals. We're interested in almost the other way of build it for individual patients and families, see how they're using it, learn, then take it to the next level up. A single provider clinic, a group of people, who are providers and who are dealing with these issues. But so look out for that. Counterforce Health, I think it's going to be huge. And, it's kind of in line with our mission. We always start at consumer and just see what the consumer's problems are. But surveys indicated insane amount of pain on that, like less than 1% of people appeal denied claims. It's both a awareness issue. 70% of people don't even know in detail their rights. And then the remaining kind of 25+% of people find it intimidating, to just do and spend hours and hours on research. So, we think we can really streamline that and significantly increase the rate that claims denials are being appealed. And, that's, I think that's a good thing for patients. So I'm really excited about that.
Really interesting. Yeah. So patients and their families, unless they are already expert in dealing with a denied claim, it's almost impossible learning curve to get up to figure out what to do.
Totally agree. The best quote is, one of our advisors is a division chief at Duke Health. And he helped his mother, who's a retired PhD, fight a lot of denied claims during her cancer treatment. And he was like, this is ridiculous. Like it would take two smart people hours and hours to do this. And, we are off means and can do it. And he was like, what is the average person doesn't even have a chance, But I think the benefit is our tool has gotten so good that now the letters are able to be generated in less than 5 minutes of the quality that him and his mother were spending, 6+ hours writing and researching. And I think that's kind of the power of, I like to see like people like using this new technology, like things like AI, and not just like building kind of like another B2B thing where like businesses kind of like get more efficiency or make more money. But I feel like the real power of these tools is like democratizing access and like building stuff for regular people to help them solve problems that they're dealing with, to help them save hours and hours of time, to help people get the treatment they need. And almost like, frankly, I would hate to say it, like to fight the insurance companies. It's like AI versus AI, because right now, like the average person is at a big disadvantage. So yeah, pretty excited about the opportunity.
There's a bad joke about AI right now, which goes that in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, The Terminator, the Air Force built a supercomputer, which then wakes up and decides what it really needs to do is destroy humanity. And the joke is that the movie was directionally correct, but it's actually going to be a medical claims management AI that wakes up.
Sad that that's the joke, but you're right. You're right. It's like hilarious.
So now we move on to our main topic. Here goes. So a tech framework for aging in place. Tech can help the Silver Tsunami age in place. Here's a framework for what is needed at each level of care. Aging is the biggest demographic trend in the US and the world. There isn't enough skilled care available. Tech will fill the gap. Seniors want to age in place, and there's greater opportunity than ever to meet the needs of aging seniors in home with technology. We will cover issues like, well, why don't we just jump into what are the needs of seniors as they age?
Yeah, good question, Stephen. I'll focus on kind of like, obviously there's a bifurcation in the market, right? There's like seniors that are much more independent and active. And I'd say we'll kind of not focus on those for now because that's not kind of like the market we're operating in. And then there's people who need kind of help with care. And I think that is like a huge innovation opportunity. I think the biggest need I will ask with is this, if you were 80 years old today and starting to have some functional limitations, whether it's like a start of cognitive decline, some mobility challenges, et cetera, do you want to move into an assisted living facility or would you like to stay at home? I guess a rhetorical question, I think, for most of you or your audience, but I think I certainly would like to stay at home, as long as I can. That's kind of where the memories are. That's where, there's a sense of independence and autonomy. And statistically, from research, the move into facility-based care will shorten life expectancy by 3 years. All other factors adjusted, right? Like race, income level, pre-existing health conditions, everything. So it is known that you will die faster if you go. So then you have this wave of people that are hitting these ages and starting to have some challenges. And they are going to these because there aren't good options to stay at home. And I think that is both kind of the current state of kind of aging beyond a certain level, in our country. And I also think that is a huge innovation opportunity. If you think about why is this happening, due to advances in technology and treatments over the last 20, 30 years, a lot of people physically are living longer, but in other ways, let's say cognitively, for example, are not. So people will have a prolonged life, but in their last 5-7 years of life, they may be losing cognitive abilities and need a lot more help. And so I think you have this, huge population that is dealing with these challenges, as well as like their family members, as if a spouse happens to be still alive, if the adult children happen to be around and, depending on where they're living in the country. So it's not just a challenge for that person, but it's a second order challenge for a lot of the family caregivers. And it's an enormous market. This is, aging related care is $1 trillion market. That's kind of like roughly right now bifurcated into half facility-based care, half into home-based care. It's expected to triple over the next decade as a large share of our population hits, 75 and 80. I think people kind of misforecast it where it wasn't when the baby boomers turned 65. 65 is not when mass care needs rise. It's really when you start turning into your late 70s, 80. And if you kind of do the math of like World War II, post-World War II baby boom, 1946, we're now just hitting a point where a lot of those folks are starting to turn, 78, 79, 80. And I think now you're going to have a huge skyrocketing care needs in society. So beyond just that population, I think it's going to have second order impacts on healthcare across society because they're going to start consuming a lot more care. And we don't have the resources to deal with it. We don't have enough people. At all levels on down, doctors, nurses, physician assistants to frontline care providers, nurse aides, et cetera. So I think we're going to have to reimagine the entire care system.
What about for aging in place, a framework for what kind of care is needed at each level of need?
Sure. So I think what I observe in aging in place is the journey starts, let's say young, if you're like proactive in planning. So if you're, 65 and healthy, you may start kind of planning out, okay, where am I going to live? What's going to be my support system? If you happen to have a spouse, you might start thinking, okay, if one person gets sicker or has these challenges, how are we going to manage care? But it's like pretty kind of like, I'd say low touch and just like planning. A lot of the phase happens to be financial planning in nature. When I see like proactive people approach this, usually at that place where like no one's had any issues, but you're starting to think about it, people start, at least the people that are planning ahead will start really thinking about financial planning and make contingency plans for if XYZ happens. Then really what I observe in a lot of people's journey, especially because we focus a lot on like dementia and Alzheimer's care, which is, by the way, a very large and growing population. I observe that the start of early, kind of mild cognitive decline onwards is usually when then people start thinking about care needs, where it hasn't gotten bad enough that care is immediately needed, but things are starting to happen that proactive people will start planning. If XYZ I observe, then I will start getting more care, or a literally spouse or adult child will start, kind of proactively planning. Unfortunately, from what I see from most people in aging in place is usually they go through that phase with some idea in mind, but not actually taking action. And then the first action is taken after a crisis. I hate to say it, but this is like the majority of people that, we see and that we help, is a crisis happens where cognitive decline then accelerated. Usually people don't have a way to kind of continuously monitor and keep tabs on, kind of where they are on that journey. And then through falls, through wandering, through accident, through some crisis event that then highlights to either themselves or their family members that now we need to come up with a care plan because status quo and just full independence and autonomy isn't enough. And I think that's really when people go into rush mode. And then because they're doing it at a time of crisis, usually very rapid decisions are taken, which may not actually be optimal for the long term. And then sadly, I hate to say that then many people just go from crisis to crisis for a while until they kind of like settle into a baseline once they finally found an option that works for them. And then oftentimes the next kind of more intense care phase, let's say, is aging at home, which would be the dream of most people. That often lasts for years. In many cases, 5+ years of getting pretty active care at home, managing health, through other monitoring tools. That can be like a pretty long phase. So I think it's for people that are kind of like in this journey or maybe managing this journey for spouses or parents, I think it's important to kind of think that these phases are pretty long, and if planned properly, they can go much better than if addressed, kind of in a scramble or an emergency.
Great, thank you. And what are some of the roles that technology can play here? What do you think are some of the, I think your company actually helps manage care for seniors who need help at home. What are some of the most common uses you see for technology?
Sure. I mean, I think it's surprisingly, I'd say aging in place is not a very heavy technology industry. I've been really surprised by it. And I went through this challenge myself in my mid-30s, and that's really what opened it up to kind of like, I just couldn't believe there was minimal tech-enabled care help going on in a home setting. And, so I'll give an example. Currently, the way that somebody would manage getting care at home is over the phone, pen and paper, local sales visit, right? That the care in the country is really controlled by the care agency system, which is like a franchisee system that was set up in the 1980s and 1990s. So, you're in Boston, right? So if your, mother or father were living in Boston and they needed help, you would call a local care company. That would be mostly like a kind of glorified staffing company. They would come and like visit your home or your parents' home, sit down with you, come up with a plan. I'm going to get you caregivers on these days and times. Make you sign like a physical contract. And, typically that business model works where, you pay $40-$45 an hour, depending on which city you're in. And, they staff you with caregivers to help. And they turn around and pay the caregiver typically less than half. So these are kind of like localized staffing businesses that have like franchisor banners. But really the local franchisee operator is, profit maximizing for 200-300 people, that they can get in a good scenario. I couldn't believe that in 2021, 2022, when we started CareYaya, that was like the prevailing industry. It's about as antiquated, in my opinion, as like the taxi cab industry was in, 2007, 2008, before, Uber started their innovation. So that's kind of like the prevailing way that most people are managing care. Where I think the opportunity for technology is, so by the way, with that as backdrop, if it's that low tech to get the care. Imagine what's happening during the care. And the answer is zero, right? This is a extremely non-tech approach to managing home care. So, these companies are typically not sending their workers with iPads, helping you set up digital health tools at home. That, to some degree, that might be done, by the hospitals and, clinicians seeing you. But like home-based care is mostly like a low-tech business because it doesn't start with tech, right? These are not tech-first companies. So I thought that was kind of like a big opportunity, to your point, like thinking on a positive side, like where is the opportunity? So we thought our first innovation was, okay, let's use tech to streamline this whole experience. Let's imagine that you have we have examples of people using CareYaya like this. And by the way, I haven't even explained what our platform is, so we have built an Uberized version of caregiver matching, where you, as a person booking care for someone, can go online and go to CareYaya.org on your phone or computer. Within 2 minutes, book and schedule a caregiver to go take care of mom or dad. We really target kind of the adult children of aging parents in most cities across America. And uniquely, the caregivers are all college students who are aspiring to go into clinical healthcare careers. So pre-med, nursing, pre-physician assistant, physical therapy, et cetera. And we have over 25,000 of them now. We are at some of the top universities in the country in your area in Boston. We're at Harvard, Tufts, Northeastern, Boston University. We started the program initially at Duke University and UNC Chapel Hill in our backyard in Research Triangle, North Carolina. And then we're in San Francisco, parts of Texas, Florida, kind of rapidly expanding all over the country. And, so we thought that there was a lot of tech innovation you could do in how care is scheduled, matched, vetted in who the caregivers are. We think that due to a low-tech industry that is profit maximizing at local levels and running this franchise or franchisee model, there is too high of an administrative overhead and markup that results in both the consumer having a bad experience because they're having to pay too much for the care, $40 an hour. And then two, the caregiver typically on average in America making less than $15 an hour, because a lot of that is going to middleman fees, administrative waste, manual staffing, et cetera. CareYaya operates in a completely different way, tech first. And as a result, what you have is in Boston, instead of paying $40 an hour to a local care company and just getting random caregivers to help you, you're getting Harvard and Tufts pre-med students helping you at $22 an hour. So you've like massively reduced the administrative overhead and massively improved the pay of the caregivers and attracted a different workforce of caregivers, to care for the aging population. So I think that results in like an awesome customer experience for the person booking the care, for the person receiving the care, and frankly, for the person providing the care. And as a result, that's been responsible for our growth that we've like absolutely taken off in, less than 3 years of building it. I think that, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I think starting with tech-enabled care matching and then having a kind of tech-savvy workforce going into the home, the medium and long-term plan for CareYaya, which we've already started implementing, is that students bringing a lot of cutting-edge tech into the home for ongoing kind of cognitive monitoring and diagnostic purposes, for therapeutic purposes, for even just simple benefits like a life story capture, interaction with family, kind of keep them updated on what's going on. There's so many things the home-based care industry is just not doing that I think if you take a tech-first approach, you can really reinvent the system. So yeah, I see a huge opportunity.
Is there a need for the senior to be sort of better connected? So assuming everyone has a phone and can use a phone, I have seen products that offer just connection in a different way. So one level of product is the pendant you wear around your neck that detects if you've fallen and that calls a call center, which in turn will dispatch an emergency vehicle to your home. Mm-hmm. That's one level. Another level is giving a loved one the ability to sort of just start talking to you in your house and see your room. So you wouldn't want a stranger to be able to, this is like a setup Skype machine or something in your house, and you wouldn't want a stranger to be able to just turn that on, but you might not care if your adult daughter turns it on and says, hey, where are you? Can I see you? Or whatever. It's a couple steps easier than initiating a call and having it be picked up and that sort of thing. And then we've also seen fall detectors where you don't wear a pendant, but there's microwaves running through your house and they can detect a fall and they know where you are in your house. And we've also seen devices like Amazon Echo where a senior can just talk to the device and get product purchased or something like that. Do you see this as that as seniors age, they'd like these different ways of communicating than just the standard phone call?
Yes, 1,000%. I think a lot of these products are very beneficial, not just for the older adult, but for peace of mind for the family who often lives kind of farther away. If you think about the changing demographics of the country over the last 50 years, right? There's a stat that 50 years ago, most people, I think over half of people lived within 30 minutes of their aging parents. Now it's less than 10%. So think about that, right? People have scattered all over the country, which is great, in terms of like people have pursued work and careers and lives elsewhere. But this creates a challenge. So many people across our society are going to become long distance caregivers of their aging parents. And they're going to need products like this to keep peace of mind. Otherwise, somebody's going to have to move. And so we see a lot of opportunity in terms of how people are using these products. The gap where I see, and where I think also is kind of an opportunity, is most of the older adults are not going to rush to set up these products themselves. So a lot of the companies, will come up to us and say, hey, let's collaborate and whatever. And, I was just at CES last week and literally met with multiple products in each of these categories that you mentioned, kind of like smart TVs that monitor and talk to people, ways to see where people are through Wi-Fi and other kind of devices for safety, fall prevention, fall monitoring technology. And the universal problem with the pure technologists who build this hardware is that they can't figure out who's going to buy it. Outside of like very forward-thinking older adults, most of the time, they're going to be the person who benefits, but not the person who buys and sets up. And then usually the adult child who might be the caregiver is going to be that person, but they're not thinking, let me learn how to do one more thing, go buy that and set it up. I think where this becomes like a seamless consumer experience is when the care provider that's already coming into the home and helping you with care becomes the natural conduit for, let me introduce you and tell you about this technology and I will set it up for you. And I think that there are people trying to solve that. And I think that's a huge, huge opportunity. Like even big companies like Best Buy, they're trying to like shift their geek squad into this kind of like tech information and tech delivery and setup squad, which I think is a cool, conduit. We're obviously trying to do that through CareYaya, where, our phase one is, okay, we just have this massive care force around the country of tech savvy college students. But, phase two is let's arm them with setting up a bunch of tech and kind of keep using it for older adults. And I think that's a big opportunity. And I think kind of the end point is if you get that set up well, I think that the share of people that will need to move into assisted living facilities drops a lot. Because in effect, you've kind of solved that.
So I encountered exactly what you were speaking of recently with a friend's family around Christmas time, which is that an adult daughter bought her parents an Aura frame, which is a consumer product. It is a frame with a blank picture in it, but it's actually an LCD screen, and you can load photos up, and then it turns on, and you can have it turn on at certain times of day, and then shows photos, family photos, that sort of thing. And in this case, and it brags that it uses a simple app to put photos from where you have your photos onto the Aura device. And so sure enough, the adult parents could not set this up themselves. And even though it brags that somehow using an app makes it simpler and easier to do this. And so it was a process involving the adult kids to figure out how to load the photos onto the. So Eugene has a question, which is interesting differentiator getting college students as far as matching. How is this different than Honor or Home instead?
Great question. So I'm not as familiar with Honor. I guess Honor and Home Instead are combined, right? But I'd say the traditional like kind of Home Instead care model is, from what I understand, and I could be wrong, is a typically 100% markup model on caregiver pay. And then traditional caregiver recruiting. So something like 90+% of the care workforce in America has like no college education. Many may not even have kind of finished high school. And it's because the industry's operating structure is very, very low wages and then significant markups. Like in our home state where we started in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the average caregiver pay in the state is something like $12.50 an hour. The average care company in the state is charging $30 to $35 an hour. So that's kind of like the Honor. It's effectively kind of like a staffing model that the franchisor is kind of finding local franchisees, to buy and operate. And those are the constraints that franchisees operate with. They charge you $30 an hour. if I had to kind of like roughly approximate, you'd spend, $4 or $5 of royalties to corporate parent. So now you're down to 25. You spend another, $4 or $5 on sales, marketing, in terms of have local sales staff that's going around building relationships with doctors, et cetera. You're running a lot of Facebook ads, Google AdWords, every other type of like newspaper, TV advertising you can think of. Now you're down to 20. Then you spend another $5+ on administrator overhead. You have like schedulers, people who are calling and saying, go here on this appointment, go here, kind of managing the caregivers. If somebody's out sick, that scheduler is calling around to see who else they can find. You're doing a lot of like manual recruiting just out in the community, trying to get caregivers to come to your office, like vet them. You're sending your salesperson out with contracts to do home visits and like get people to sign up. So that's really, and then of course the margin, right? Like the local franchisee is going to operate and take their margin, which would be around like $3 or $4. So you have this like extremely bloated structure where $12.50 an hour turns into $30 an hour, but from the consumer's point, that $12.50 an hour person's doing 99% of the work. Everything else is like the company operating. So the company is capturing more than 50% of the value, but isn't delivering more than 50% of value. And then from the caregiver standpoint, they're pissed because they're like, I'm doing 99% of the work here in this person's house doing the hard work, but I'm capturing less than half the share. So I think that's the Home Instead Honor model. And of course, Honor has some other stuff too, in terms of like they have a marketplace for other agencies, but like the actual caregiving through that Home Instead agency is being done like that. And I think that creates like a poor experience on both sides. And CareYaya, I would say the model is drastically different in terms of we have just like ruthlessly streamlined a lot of these markups and costs down so that our version 1.0 product was costing us less than $2 an hour to do everything, that these companies were spending over 18 per hour on. And then we've iterated that product a couple of times and it's not even AI for the sake of AI, but we've like automated a lot of these operations in terms of like automated the way we interview. It's effectively a data company. So we're seeing on the back end, based on the interviews, how do people do in care sessions and how are the care sessions rated and reviewed? And then you learn back and feedback that into how you onboard people. So by doing it kind of like data first and tech first, you've now, in our case, gotten that cost down to less than 50 cents per hour of like staffing, vetting, scheduling, backups, et cetera. So that is just like a durable, massive cost advantage, that is sustainable. And I think that can kind of like disrupt industries. So I don't see anyone else in the industry doing things like that.
So I see something, we've compared what you're doing to staffing agencies, but I think it's interesting to compare what you're doing to Uber and Best Buy. So Uber wants to get into healthcare, and their vision of healthcare is a couple things. It might be that your driver has been vetted in some way, and now your driver walks into the home of the elderly person, picks them up, takes them to the car, makes sure they get in the car and are comfortable, takes them to a hospital appointment, then helps them park, helps them out of that, and gets them to the registration desk. And most of us don't think of our Uber driver helping us get into parking and getting us into a building to a registration desk. And that would be a higher paid Uber trip than just your average Uber trip, especially qualified person. Another vision with Uber, and of course they're starting with the driver, and is that you would have a kit in the back of the Uber and you get a call, and the call is to go and do 9 measurements of a patient at home using the kit in the back, which could include a blood pressure or something like that. And so you arrive with the kit, costs a $700 kit that Bluetooth connected. And so a patient wouldn't necessarily have that in their home, might not be able to do self-measurements, but the driver is able to go into the home and do these measurements. And then Geek Squad, really interesting. They're starting with somebody having a computer set up at home, but they want to get into healthcare as well. And so somebody has a blood pressure device that wants to be connected to Wi-Fi, and Best Buy wants to sell them their next laptop, but they also want to sell them their wireless blood pressure monitor, and they also want to sell them the tech to get their laptop on Wi-Fi and troubleshoot it and get the blood pressure cuff on Wi-Fi, and you name it, whatever the next device is for wellness, fitness, or real care management. Best Buy wants to sell the device and then set it up. But neither of these people is going to be providing care. They're not going to be staying for an hour. They're not going to be walking around the house. They're not going to be helping the senior open the child-proof bottle, which is impossible for seniors to open. And so you're starting from a different point, which is, a young adult who's embarking on a healthcare career. And that person can probably address basic tech challenges like the Geek Squad person, but they're there to provide, a low level of care and support and help to the person who needs it. And then Uber has the 1099 contractor model, whereas I think Best Buy's Geeks in Geek Squad are W-2 as well. So anyway, it's just a really interesting way to think about where you're entering, because there is this lumpy need. People need someone to provide support. They need someone to provide care. They need someone to fix their tech, and they need someone maybe to take them to the hospital or something like that. And so ideally, that's not 5 different people. Ideally, that would be one person who would just do all of them. So
no, you're right. I mean, I think those are great business lines. And, just to be fully transparent, we're actively in talks with Uber and Lyft and may decide on a partnership that we'll announce over the next 3 months. But what I like about what the transportation companies are doing is they are recognizing that. And it's kind of cool because I approach a lot of these as not like what product do I want to build, but what is the person's problem and, how can we solve the problem? And I think they've identified a couple of things which are really interesting in the older adult population is that people are missing appointments, and not just a random doctor's visit, but they're missing important neurology appointments. They're missing important, Mohs skin cancer surgery. They're missing these things due to transportation challenges, due to not having somebody be able to take them. They're missing routine procedures because they can't be discharged at home and be by themselves, overnight. That the doctor will not do that procedure. So I think it's very cool that Uber and Lyft are both focusing on solving that through kind of point-to-point transportation. And critically, I think the one thing that is interesting is that they're trying to get the insurance companies to pay, which would then help allow this service. Because if it's out of pocket and it's a higher priced Uber driver, I still think a lot of people aren't going to use it. But if it's insurance pays because you made it to the necessary surgery or procedure or appointment, then everyone wins. So I think that's pretty cool. So I think that's a collaboration opportunity, and we're actively exploring that. And then, what Best Buy is doing is also very interesting. I think I'd say kind of full transparency, I like the ideas that they're pushing. The only challenge that I haven't really been able to figure out, which is why we're slow playing the collaboration, is that I'm not sure that people really want to buy all these things. And the project doesn't seem to be as driven by solving people's problem as it does to be, let's sell them more stuff. And I generally think those kind of innovations, they may work in the near term, but I don't think it's going to have a great user experience, So cool to see people trying.
So we have a few more questions, and for our audience, now's the time for your last questions. So Nicole asks, is there an opportunity to connect the caregiver insights from the tech to the services that a senior might have through their care plan, specifically their MCA plan, so that everything is better integrated? That's interesting. You have people in the home with the patient who could be collecting data, and then that data could go to providers, possibly, although you're not directly, this is self-pay for your people in the house, and they're not necessarily connected to the primary care physician.
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, I'd love to build that type of integration. Right now we don't have that, partly because we are not going through the traditional healthcare channels of the insurance company or kind of the physicians and the healthcare providers. We're just kind of families are booking through us. But I think that such a information flow would be beneficial for everyone. So yeah, would love to, if you have any suggestions on that or ideas on how I can do that, would love to explore that, because I think that's a great idea, and that could help a lot of people.
You're providing care and support to seniors, and there's certain things that they ought to be doing and may not be doing. They might need to keep a pain journal and not keep it, and so they can be interviewed by someone who keeps it for them. They may need to take blood pressure measurements, but they haven't done it, and so the person visiting them can do it. Some ways that someone who's brought in for one purpose can go through a checklist of common sense things the patient should be doing to check that they are doing them, or give them help in doing them, or something like that. We keep them adherent to medications. So May asks, what's the barrier to entry for any competition? And she also, I think she mentions that she saw your CNBC interview.
No, thank you.
So what is the barrier to competition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I don't really operate with kind of that kind of mindset. Like, I'd welcome if there are other people, trying to enter. Like, I kind of like just think, hey, this is a problem worth solving, and we're trying to solve it. And over time, I think a barrier to entry in any kind of business, when you're like starting out and you're new, I think people might say there's barrier to entry just to kind of get investors, but in reality, I think in most innovation there is none, and there isn't one for a long time. The real barrier to entry is one you create over time because you're delivering a great experience. So I think if you're Amazon, I keep overusing the analogy, but if you're shipping books out of Bezos' garage in 1996, there is no barrier to entry. And in 1998, 1999, but there's a barrier to entry when you do a series of innovations over time that it's just very hard for anyone else to replicate one, let alone keep up. So I think in our case, yeah, there logically isn't really one in the near term. Kind of the soft ones that we have developed now that we've been around for a few years is that the brand is huge. The awareness, it's almost like a network effect of a two-sided marketplace where if you have a network effect where of the top 50 universities in the country, we are at over half of them, and we have 25,000 students on, and the brand is very well known. Now it's like a recruiting headache for somebody else to go in and do that from scratch. I think in direct-to-consumer business, actually, it is very, very hard to get people. So we have like grinded it out for 3+ years to now have significant awareness in places like Boston, San Francisco, Texas, Florida. We don't do it through paid ads. And I think that's like a very durable barrier to entry of just like grassroots consumer awareness, massive awareness through PR and earned media, through social media, organic, like not advertising, and then just through local collaborations with hospitals. So these are kind of like soft barriers to entry that add up. And then the cost advantage, our cost just keeps going down. As we keep learning and getting more and more data from the care sessions, our administrative and overhead cost is unbelievably low compared to others. But, anything you have to be on your toes because people could kind of innovate, and that would be fine. I think that if somebody came in and copycatted it, awesome. Like way more people get care. By that time, I'll have moved on to my third, fourth innovation. We don't kind of stay still. Like we're launching a bunch of innovations. We're launching that AI to help patients fight health claims, health insurance claims denials. We're launching a product to help people manage advanced care planning. So it's kind of building a culture of like rapid innovation and not really a culture. And I had to say, I don't want to knock any innovators, but I don't operate in business as like rent extraction. I don't think about like, oh, I have this building and then now it's a barrier and let me just see how much I can make off it. I operate as like, I'm just want to build cool stuff, help people solve their problems, and then just keep doing that over and over. And I think sometimes an operating philosophy like that itself becomes a barrier to entry because I don't think everybody approaches business like that.
And let me throw in that if you're an early mover and you wind up with the best network of buyers and sellers, that would be adult children are the buyers, and then the sellers is the labor of college students, then that having the best network can create a real hurdle for the next arriving competitor to equal yours, because there's going to be a period of years where they're not as good as you. And so why would a new buyer join their network, and why would a new seller join their network? So that's one competitive advantage. And you see that in a lot of markets where Uber went in and sort of won the market away from taxi companies, and Lyft came in, and after years, Lyft is a distant number 2. And another idea I wanted to pass on to you I just had was frequent flyer miles. So the buyer is the adult daughter in California, and she's buying regularly visits. And maybe she's earning CareYaya frequent flyer miles. And then with these miles, she's looking and she's seeing something like, oh, I see that they could do product setup. And I've never hired someone from CareYaya to do product setup. And I see that would cost $50 or 300 CareYaya frequent flyer miles. And I have 400. So I'll spend my 300 on that. So that this would keep people, instead of looking at different services, they'd be very happy to spend their loyalty miles on their next purchase within your network. So that's just a thought. And once again, if you're the leader in your region, then you're getting those people with those miles that can only be used on your network and not on your competitor's network. So then we have Nisha asks, do these students do laundry, take people shopping, and set up medications?
Yes. Yes, to all of the above. I think, they kind of do whatever the person needs that is not super clinical. So most of the people are like using it as, what would you do if your son or daughter was like directly taking care of you, and instead it's this student from a nearby university. So yeah, they help with kind of like activities of daily living, everything from laundry, household tasks, preparing meals, taking people out for walks, running errands for them and all that. So it's like, I think it's helpful for the students, because I find that many of them build long-lasting relationships. Like, it's not pure Uber in terms of it's not just transactional. They don't just do Monday and then go again, a month from now. Most of them are developing recurring relationships with people that are lasting months and months. And many of them are the most heartwarming thing and social impacting of the whole thing is like, I write many of them recommendation letters for medical school, physician assistant school, et cetera. And they mention this as like a key feature of their experience. And it gives them a completely different experience than working at a hospital as a certified nurse aide. Because in a lot of the clinical situations, you're seeing somebody for maybe 5 to 15 minutes at a time and just going room to room. Here, they're seeing the same person for months and months on end. And they're like shifting the way they think about the person, that this isn't just a patient with XYZ disease, but like this is a real person. This is their family. These are the things that they're going through. And I think it develops like a huge empathy for what people are going through and not just kind of viewing people as patients. And it has like second order effects of like, I hope that I hope it changes like the way a lot of, thousands of doctors and future PAs and nurses think about the population that they're helping, because it gives like a human element to what's going on outside the clinic, in this person's home and what's their life like. And also, what are their joys like? even people with like absolutely debilitating illnesses that are months away from passing still have a lot of like joy. They have a lot of memories of their life that they want to share. And I think it's really cool to see thousands of like intergenerational relationships being formed. Like, when was the last time the average 20-year-old in America interacted with a 75 or 80-year-old that wasn't their own grand? Probably none. So we're like doing that at large scale. And I think that's probably the coolest part of the innovation.
And Nisha also asked, do you offer personal care like showering and toileting help? And are these students doing this for $22 an hour?
Good question. No, we don't offer that because we found that that's where kind of like the acuity level is higher. And also that's something where kind of the students' training level is variable. So we didn't want to turn into kind of like a certified nurse aide program for a variety of reasons. I think we are amenable to that, and we're talking with like various governments about that. One of the biggest barriers is like the cost of certification and training is quite high. Kind of the CNA market is also like a little bit of a racket in terms of how much these courses cost. So I think I didn't want to close the door and only have it available to students that could out of pocket $600 to $1,000 to get the certs, and then also take weeks and weeks of classes. So we stuck to kind of companion level care only. That's kind of below that stage. But I do think over time that would be like an interesting offering if I can figure out a way to make a affordable CNA program that every student can take, or find somebody else to pay.
That's great. Well, I think that's all the questions we have time for. Also, Matt on the call and May on the call have both asked to follow up with you. So I'll send you their names after the call.
That's great. Yeah. Sure. Hit me up on LinkedIn anytime. Or LinkedIn or Twitter, but yeah, it's Neal Shah, CareYaya on LinkedIn, and happy to chat with people.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining the show, Neal.
Thanks, Steve. This was wonderful. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks everyone for listening.
And you've been listening to Digital Health Investor Talk with host Stephen Wardell. Special thanks to our guest, Neal Shah of CareYaya. We're publishing this show as an episode of the Digital Health Investor Talk show. Subscribe on Apple and Spotify, and don't forget to rate us. And our next show is on Wednesday, February 5th at 4 p.m. Where can healthcare best use artificial intelligence with Chad Pytel? And for our Boston audience, I've got one of my innovation nights tomorrow night at the Liberty Hotel with an MIT professor of computer science on artificial intelligence in healthcare. Thanks, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Bye, Neal.
Thanks. Nice seeing you.